It is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer live on a Tuesday in July. We're a few days away from training camp. Later on in this episode, we're going to talk with offensive guru Bobby Peters about what the Ravens offense looked like in 2023 in the first year under Todd Monken and what it could look like going forward in 2024, what kind of adjustments they'll make. But first, Jonas, we, of course, have to talk about the tragic, the untimely, and really the shocking news that Jacoby Jones, former Ravens wide receiver, returner, just days after turning 40, passed away peacefully in his home in New Orleans. Uh, he was a legend for so many reasons in this franchise. Had some incredible moments en route to a Super Bowl victory for Super Bowl 47. And it was certainly unwelcome news that he passed away at only 40 years old, at just weeks after he was at Ravens minicamp.
Yeah, that was probably the biggest shock of seeing that news, just knowing that only a couple weeks earlier he looked full of life, full of happiness at mandatory minicamp. Gian Han tweeted a great remembrance of him, just being this convivial, electric, just amped up guy. He was yelling for Isaiah Likely to start. He was heckling current Ravens after maybe they messed up on a few plays. So to go from your last memory being a guy who looked like the whole world was still in front of him, even though obviously he was in retirement, to a guy who, joins the latest in the string of kind of untimely Ravens deaths, was really sad and really shocking. And, your heart goes out to his family and to all those in the Ravens family who are affected and are probably even more shocked by his passing than we were.
Yeah. Neither of us covered him when he was a player in Baltimore, but he's obviously been a very visible face around the franchise since then, showing up at the playoff game against the Texans. Our photographer Ulysses Munoz got a great shot of him pointing to his ring, his Super Bowl ring. He just he would appear at these events, get fans fired up, and so many fans had such great connections with him because he was such an electric player. He played with his heart on his sleeve, and the Ravens don't win that Super Bowl without him. Obviously, the Mile High Miracle, 41 seconds left, 70-yard touchdown in Denver just absolutely silences the crowd, and Ravens go on to win in double overtime. And then he has the most all-purpose yards in Super Bowl history. That starts the second half with a 108-yard kickoff return for a touchdown after he'd already scored a receiving touchdown earlier in the game. Just incredible, indelible moments in Ravens history, and somebody who overcame adversity. His first few years in Houston when he was a Texan did not go particularly well. He muffed a punt in a playoff game, and he comes to Baltimore and only has 3 seasons in Baltimore, but makes an incredible impact and helps them win a Super Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, the Mile High Miracle, I think, is probably the play most associated with him, even though it was not a Super Bowl winner. That was top 2, top 3, if not top 1 play in franchise history. And it was a little bit sad to go back and read some of the accounts from that game, to read the Baltimore Sun's gamer, to read Peter King's gamer for Sports Illustrated, and not really see a whole lot of quotes from Jacoby, who was obviously this font of, good quotes, good, fun times, everything. A lot happened in that game, so you kind of understand it. You want to talk to the quarterback, you want to talk to everybody reacting to the play, but really the only attention paid to him beyond just describing what happened was just him talking about how he knew that if Joe was going to look for him, he had to be hauling ass down the sideline, and he did that. But it was just kind of a little disappointing and sad to go back and see that a guy who was so central in such a prominent part of Ravens history was maybe a little bit underserved in the moment. Obviously, we all know now just how important and how incredible that moment was for the fabric of this Ravens franchise. But I just hope, and I think he did know how important he was to the fan base, to the franchise, to everyone who came across with him, because this is a very, very different franchise with a very different place in NFL lore, if not for Jacoby Jones.
Yeah, looking back on it, there have been some retrospective pieces. There was a good one put out by the NFL. They have a throwback channel, and they did basically a retrospective of Jacoby's career. And there are some great quotes, some great interview moments in that. There's also, Jameson Hensley, who writes for ESPN, had a story after Jacoby's passing, and he mentioned an interview they did after the 10-year anniversary of the Mile High Miracle. And there was one good quote from there, from Jacoby, which is, "When I ran into the end zone, it was quiet. You heard rat piss on cotton." Real. That just it's just the kind of funny lines that he could deliver, the kind of entertaining, aspects he could bring to the game. And in that video, the retrospective and where they sat down and looked back on his career, Jacoby would often just allow his emotions to make some decisions for him on as to whether he's gonna take the ball out of the end zone, on kickoffs. 108 yards to start the second half of a Super Bowl. 9 times out of 10, coach would tell you to take a knee there, but he wanted the moment. He felt like he was, uh, was making the right decision, and he certainly was, took it the distance. So, he was an electric player, and his passion, his fire helped, fuel the legend that he became in Baltimore.
Yeah, he really lived and played with a joie de vivre, just a love for life, a joy for life. I think probably most obvious just in the tributes that poured in from across the NFL. You had guys from those Houston days, which weren't always the brightest, singing his praises. J.J. Watt, calling him one of the most fun-loving teammates and people he's ever been around. Running back Arian Foster said that he didn't think there's anyone he's ever played with who believed in me like Jacoby has. CJ Mosley, obviously, overlapped with him for a little bit, I believe, in Baltimore. Tweeted Monday morning, "I can't believe, excuse me, you got me shedding a tear." Obviously, Ray Lewis told him that he'll truly be missed. Torrey Smith, who played with him, said he thanks God for the memories and your impact on this world. You were one of one, and I think probably the most surprising for me, because he didn't overlap with him as a Raven at all, was Lamar Jackson. On Instagram last night, I think initially after the news came out, he, put out an RIP Jacoby, but you didn't really get a sense for what their relationship was until Lamar on his Instagram story last night put a video of him, next to Jacoby, saying that he was one of the first people in Baltimore to welcome him with open arms as a Raven. He said, I don't even write shit like this, but I'm feeling away. And then, kind of interestingly, he said, "You gave me way too much fuel with this." So obviously, Lamar's not a guy who typically lets you into what's motivating him or what's fueling him emotionally, but this seems to have really struck a chord with him, and it's a passing with a lot of profundity, I think, for him.
Absolutely. It's going to be certainly a difficult, time for the Ravens family when they gather at training camp, and his presence will obviously be incredibly missed around one winning drive and throughout the season. I'm sure we'll see plenty more tributes, plenty more, moments dedicated to Jacoby Jones. Just a difficult time. All right, Jonas. We have more to talk about when it comes to the Ravens. Ravens made some roster moves yesterday. They placed running back Keaton Mitchell on the physically unable to perform list. This was kind of expected. Remember, he had his knee injury in mid-December, which is about 8 months ago. Uh, we knew that he wasn't going to be healthy to start the season. He's not going to be active on this roster in week one. He can come off the PUP list at any time. The one that was slightly less expected, and I would say completely unexpected, was fourth-round rookie TJ Tampa, cornerback, also placed on the physically unable to perform list. A guy who was a full participant at minicamp. What do you think the reason was for that, Jonas? We're left kind of to speculate.
Yeah, not a lot of clarity on this from the Ravens side. It could be as simple as he reported on, I think, Saturday, along with the other rookies, or by Saturday with the other rookies, and maybe he just didn't pass the conditioning test. That is often a byproduct, getting placed on the PUP list, of not passing the conditioning test. That it's not disqualifying. He's not going to be able to he's not going to have to sit out training camp. These guys get as many bites at that apple as they want. Obviously, the conditioning test is a little bit harder. It's designed to be harder for cornerbacks, say, than offensive linemen, because obviously the level of conditioning needs to be a little bit higher. So you hope that it is nothing too serious physically. There wasn't any indication from anything at the end of minicamp or even OTAs that he was dealing with anything. I think he did have to sit out the combine because maybe he wasn't 100% after his last season at Iowa State. But, it could be simple as him coming off pup list even before camp starts. And this is all just a big nothing burger.
Yeah, we also did see third-round rookie Adisa Isaac, the edge rusher out of Penn State, placed on the NFI list, non-football injury list, because of the hamstring injury that he suffered during rookie minicamp. It's interesting that it's the non-football injury list, even though his hamstring injury did occur during a football activity. I mean, we don't know exactly how it occurred. We weren't there for that, but it is an interesting designation there. This is an edge rusher group that is certainly going to be hurting. We don't know yet when exactly we'll get David Ojabo back. Maybe coming back midway through camp, according to John Harbaugh. So that group could be a little thin when we start training camp.
Yeah, you wonder, because it's NFI, if maybe he, retweaked that hamstring. Maybe he aggravated it as he was getting ready for the summer to come. Obviously, that's speculation. And again, he's another guy who could be totally activated and totally cleared off that NFI list by the start of training camp, which is, of course, we get our first full team practice on Sunday. So, plenty of time for these guys to get right. Also, plenty of time for more guys to be added to the pup list or to the NFI list. I think it's either today or tomorrow, I believe, or maybe it was even yesterday, where veterans and veterans with injuries were supposed to report to camp, and the last day to report is Saturday. So it's possible that we see some of these guys, especially some of these linemen who maybe aren't in the best shape, they're ready to run the back and forth that's required in that conditioning test, or added to the pup list or to the NFI list. So again, this is not the end of the world for these guys, but it is typically the mark of a good, strong, kind of well coordinated team to have as few guys on that pup list, at least when it comes to passing the conditioning test, as possible.
Yeah, and even though players have been reporting to camp throughout the past several days, media access has not been granted yet. So we won't be there until Saturday, Sunday, when we get our eyes on these guys, and not until Sunday that we'll actually get to see them on the field. All right, Bobby. All right, Jonas. You have your interview with Bobby Peters. This was your idea because the guy literally wrote a book about the Ravens offense, which you can find on Amazon. I don't think you could find a deeper dive into the Ravens offense and everything, all of the schemes and plays that they deployed during the 2023 season than the book that Bobby Peters wrote. And you had a deep dive interview into Todd Monken's offense, but I need you to define some terms before you even get started here.
Yeah, yeah. If we can't get the guy who wrote the Ravens playbook, then let's get the guy who wrote the book about the Ravens playbook, and that's Bobby Peters. Kind of a self-taught guy who, as we'll talk about, has written a lot about some of the most interesting offenses in the NFL. Things do get a little bit nerdy, and we should encourage people to watch this on YouTube, because it's very, very helpful to actually see these plays and these clips on screen, as opposed to just listening on a podcast. Obviously, we hope it's intelligible either way. But yeah, just some terms that either Bobby or I will talk about. There's talk about the 3 technique, which is typically the defensive lineman who lines up over the guard's outside shoulder. So think of where Justin Madubuike typically lines up on a normal play. We talk about counter, which is a run play that's given the illusion of a kind of power concept in one direction, but there's a series of blocks that allows the runner to go in the opposite direction. So you have that counter flow. RPO, hopefully most people know, run pass option. It's usually up to the quarterback and what the keys are on a certain play to decide whether to hand the ball off, keep it himself, or do a short little quick pass. And then a read option, similar to the RPO, where you are reading the edge defender, the conflict defender, and letting them decide whether you are giving it to the back, keeping it yourself, or maybe doing something else.
Awesome. Well, here is that interview with Jonas and Bobby Peters.
We are delighted to have on today's Banner Ravens podcast Mr. Robbie Peters, a football coach on sabbatical who has done great work looking at offenses all over the NFL. The latest handbook that we're going to talk about today is, of course, the Ravens. If you want to check it out on Amazon, the 2023 Baltimore Ravens Complete Offensive Manual is available. Highly recommended. Came from recommendation from other Ravens Twitter users. Really does a great job just breaking down into granular detail a lot of the concepts that you might not know from last year's Ravens offense. We're going to be talking about a couple of them. But Bobby, thanks for joining us. I guess when we talk about kind of what got you interested in looking at this Ravens offense and Lamar Jackson and Todd Monken, what kind of got you hooked, and maybe were there any big picture takeaways in terms of how this offense was kind of built and operated that were surprising to you?
Yeah, so I'll take a slight step back. So usually my the teams that I'll study are usually from the Shanahan branch. I mean, obviously the Shanahan McVay tree kind of has spread rampantly throughout the NFL already. But when I was thinking about doing a Ravens book, it was kind of a little bit out of my wheelhouse. So I was like, okay, let me check out some games to see what they do, to see if this would be interesting. If I could, would be interested in writing about it. And I did. I watched like a game or two, and I'm like, okay, they do a lot of good stuff, and it's stuff that is different from the stuff that I've already studied. So I wouldn't be like regurgitating a lot of it. So that was one of my first impressions. Was they do a lot of unique things. So they blended a lot of the stuff from the Greg Roman years. And Todd Monken really, really added some good stuff to it that will hopefully make it, continue on this trajectory that they had after they had a very successful 2023.
Well, Lamar Jackson reported to training camp today, Monday. So let's start with that side of the ball, with the passing offense, and we're going to start first off with the Sale, Flood, Seattle concepts. Which, Bobby, is that just an Andy Reid kind of terminology for the Sale, Flood stuff? I hadn't seen a whole lot of Seattle concepts in terms of just how NFL Twitter talks about whatever that is. But explain just kind of what the concept does on a conceptual level, and maybe how they kind of highlighted what Lamar does really well with his vision and his touch.
Yeah, so all those things, Lamar's skills were definitely on display with this concept. So the Flood, Seattle, so Flood is a general category that I use to describe any 3-level vertical stretch towards the sideline, right? You got a deep, short, and a middle target. What you're trying to do is basically flood the flat defender with an intermediate and a low throw. The outside vertical usually just takes the top off, takes the deep half safety or the deep corner in a cover 3 or cover 4 defense. So basically that's what it boils down to. It's kind of like a high-low read. Now, when you hear the term Seattle, so that's kind of an old Andy Reid West Coast term to describe like the technique for that flood route. It's longer developing, usually takes place off play action, takes a little more nuance from the receivers to use it. What it does is basically they're going to fake like a deep crossing route first, kind of bend towards the middle of the field, stick their foot, and then come back. So I lump them together for that sake. And then the other adjustment off of it that is usually lumped together is like a scissors call, which is that outside vertical. Instead of running an outside release go, he'll run a post route. So it's just a slight tweak on the concept. And the Ravens were they averaged over 17 yards per attempt with both of those concepts, which is a staggering statistic for any pass concept, let alone even for a play action concept. Usually a successful play action concept will average anywhere from like 10 to 12 yards per attempt. So the fact that they were over 17 yards per attempt is pretty insane. Lamar has a knack, and I outline this in the book as well. He has a great feel for this throw, and he throws it really well. But what really makes this play go is his understanding and his willingness to take the check down when that intermediate route is taken away. He doesn't sit on that Seattle route too long. He'll take the check down if it's there, and he gets rid of the ball on time. So that's something that stuck out with me. That he did really well with that concept, and something that I think that Todd Monken and the coaching staff can kind of double down on for this upcoming season.
And I think you saw those concepts used a lot in 11 personnel. Obviously, that was the Ravens' kind of dominant meta last year. Almost 50% of their snaps last year came in 11 personnel, which is, one running back, one tight end, 3 wide receivers. We don't know if we're going to see them become more and more of a heavy personnel team this year with them losing Odell, maybe relying more on a rookie receiver in Devontae Walker. But it was interesting to me, Bobby, that they really leaned into 11 personnel last year, but efficiency wise, not just running, but not just passing, but running as well. They weren't super dynamic, weren't super efficient. I think they were the like around the 20th best offense just in terms of EPA per play in 11 personnel. When you look at maybe big picture, why that schematically wasn't as effective for them as it was other sets, did anything kind of stick out to you about maybe why there were some kind of bumps in the road in getting that offense in 11 personnel to be as effective as it could have been?
Yeah, so I think first what 11 personnel did for them in a positive light was it kind of opened up some of the inside zone stuff that they were doing and some of the RPO stuff. I remember one of the Bengals games specifically, they hit a couple of RPOs in that game for long gains, and they had some nice runs on inside zone as well. So what that does is it simplifies the fronts for the offense. Usually in 11 personnel, you're going to get like a 4-down over front. So you can you understand what you're going to get from that standpoint. There's not as much variability with fronts when you get into lighter personnel groups like that. And the other thing too is it creates easier reads for Lamar in the RPO and in the run game there. So and then when he does pull it on the reads, he has a lot more space to work with, because you have to account for all the weapons that the Ravens have on the outside as well. So that's one of the things that I noticed that they did well with 11 personnel. But what in like true straight drop back situations, there's definitely some how do I phrase this? There's definitely some room. Yeah. There's room to grow, but in general, obviously the Ravens had a very successful season. And I commented on this one time, and the phrase really stuck with me. Their offense was complicated enough, right? So they're not running all these different option routes that like the Patriots did over the years, or even some of the stuff that like the Shanahan McVay guys do, but they were complicated enough to get the job done. But I think there's still, with that said, right, that's a nice way of saying there's still room to grow in the sense that they could put themselves in better situations in 11 personnel. I think a lot, and one concept that jumps out to me with this is the middle read concept. So I think they had a pretty good average with this because it's a big play concept. But what it does is, so middle read, basically you have two outside verticals on the outside, and then you have a vertical read up the middle, depending on the safety, if it's one high or too high, if the receiver is going to bend his route or keep it vertical. But what you're basically doing is trusting your matchups. You're not. It's a sound play, right? Like your quarterback's not going to throw it into double coverage, but there's ways to manufacture guys open better in 11 personnel. And I think that the coaching staff, I think they could get more out of 11 personnel if they go down that route a little bit more.
Following up on that, Bobby, I think my frustration when the Ravens were in 11 personnel last year was they got so many light boxes. I think maybe more than I expected. And, whether it was Todd Monken's play calling or Lamar's decision making in some, run pass conflicts, they really didn't run the ball that often. I mean, like Keaton Mitchell carries in 11 personnel last year were just like incredibly effective, and they didn't really lean into that too much. Do you think that was prescribed for the Ravens? Do you think they could have done a better job of maybe taking what the defense gave them when there were those looks that were opportunistic to run into as opposed to passing into?
Certainly. I think some of that, and then with changing personnel, like you said, we'll kind of they'll look at it differently this year, right? The new personnel, and then also some of that has to do with the fronts they're getting too. If you're getting a 5-down front in 11 personnel, that really lends itself well to throwing the ball, because you kind of know for sure you're going to get one-on-ones for the most part. Right. Either that or they're going to leave the slot initially uncovered. Like there's no apex player out on the slot or something of that sort. But depending on the front too, I think that has a lot to do with your place selection from that standpoint.
I think something that we're going to be talking a great deal about in training camp, we've already talked a great deal about this offseason, is just what could be the future of the Ravens offense with multiple tight ends on the field. Obviously, that was a feature, not a bug under the Greg Roman offenses. We've seen what Mark Andrews can do. We've seen what Isaiah Likely can do, but rarely last year did we see those two guys on the field together, because if the Ravens were having a heavy look, Pat Ricard was typically the guy who's going to be on the field last year. So what do you think the expectations for a Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, or Mark Andrews and Charlie Kolar type grouping could be? And maybe how do you kind of balance that with the impact and the presence that you want to have with Pat Ricard being on the field as well?
Yeah, I think think you try to create a nice blend of those flood Seattle concepts we were talking about, right? Like kind of the shot plays off play action. And before I forget, I wanted to say that I think one of the ways that Baltimore's offense can improve is doubling down on those types of plays, those longer developing play action concepts with like a high low or like a deep, like with a shot and a check down. I think those are the types of reads Lamar is most comfortable with, instead of like full field. I mean, he can handle full field progressions too, but I think that's when he's at his best and he's playing his fastest. I think you can get, especially with both tight ends, like both Likely and Andrews had big plays on that Seattle route. And that's usually a route reserved for like the shiftier slot receivers. But they both were able to run that route successfully last year. So I think getting them in situations where, you can make them the primaries on these deeper routes. I think that holds a lot of strength for the Ravens in the upcoming season. And then, in the run game, I know we were going to talk about this a little bit, was the different ways they get to counter, with the multiple tight ends and then obviously with Pat Ricard on the field. I think all the different ways Baltimore gets to counter just bodes really well in the run game. Like we were saying, if you're seeing 5 down fronts, it's hard to run the ball. Well, if you've got 12 personnel or, Pat Ricard's in the game as one of the tight ends, you can run these different variations of counter that Baltimore's running and get great angles and leverage even against loaded boxes. So there's a lot of, especially on base downs, there's a lot of different things they can do out of that personnel group.
And that's a perfect transition to that counter section. You have 7 sections in your book devoted to counter. What made it so effective for the Ravens? Do you think getting younger and maybe more athletic along the interior of that line, and even also on the right side with perhaps Roger Rosengarten being the next man up at right tackle, do you think that could make them more effective? Is it more of a concept that is more amplified when you have strength as opposed to mobility, to getting guys pulling out there, to that second level? What do you think kind of was so instructive about last year's counter success, and what do you kind of think the expectations for it should be in 2024?
So first and foremost, the design of their counter runs were probably the best that I've studied in my 5-6 years of doing these deep dives on NFL teams. Most NFL teams will run one version of counter where you're pulling the backside guard to kick out the defensive end, and then you're bringing like a tight end or a fullback to wrap around for the play side backer. So that's one way. That's the most common. Baltimore ran 3 and they ran them well, and they ran adjustments off all of them. So the other main one is what's called GT counter, where both the guard and tackle will pull from the backside to the front side. And then they even ran a unique variation CT counter, which has a very specific purpose where the center will pull to kick, and then the backside tackle will pull as the second puller to lead up for the play side backer. So that specific adjustment is to combat and the 3 technique that sticks out of my mind, just because he's obviously incredible, is Aaron Donald. So a lot of times on counter runs, when the guard pulls, that backside 3 technique will slide through and kind of get in that guard's hip pocket and just blow the play up. Well, because that's a hard back block for a center to make, right? If the center's got to go all the way back to that 3 technique to block back on him. So the adjustment is, instead of pull the guard, pull the center. So now the guard basically just has to do what's called a squeeze hinge technique, where he'll step play side with one step and then kind of hinge back to take care of that 3 tech, to kind of cut him off, to prevent him from chasing that play from behind. So it's a brilliant adjustment that honestly teams should use more. So whenever the Ravens would get that 3 tech on the backside, they would check to the CT counter adjustment. And they did really well with it. And some of the other things I could talk about the Ravens counter runs for like, an hour, so you'll have to cut me off at some point. But the other design feature of it that works really well is when they want to get Lamar involved with it, they can, and they'll have advantage in the numbers and leverage game on the defense. When they don't want Lamar to be involved, obviously that takes a hat away from the Ravens' ability to get those numbers and leverage. But the way they RPO'd it and the way they formationed and motioned it, they were still able to do that. So that's incredible design and chalkboard design from the coaching staff to still get those looks, even when they're like, hey, let's block the backside defensive end so Lamar doesn't have to read it. It's 1st and 10. We don't want to get him killed. Let's hand the ball off, and we're still going to get good box numbers for this run. And they were exceptional at that. And then obviously anytime you have success, with a concept in the run game, the execution up front from the offensive line is top notch. So they're doing a lot of really good jobs with the down blocks, creating a lot of, washing down the front that way, getting a solid kick out blocked. And then obviously the puller leading through too. So they on both fronts, on both design and execution, they did a great job.
Yeah, I think it was interesting that you said that the CT counter was a nice wrinkle for the Ravens, and maybe one that is only available to teams that have a center as athletic as Tyler Linderbaum, someone who could scoop that 3-tech, and do it as efficiently as he does. It's something to consider, just how the Ravens make use of Tyler Linderbaum's obvious talents as he gets more and more experience, as he gets more and more stronger, more and more strong in the NFL. You mentioned just the weapon that Lamar is and will be in the running game. I think the Ravens, since moving on from Greg Roman, have maybe dialed back the use of him in the read option game. But when you kind of went back and looked at the film, did you come away thinking it was just kind of the right amount of Lamar in the read option game? Did you come away thinking that they could have gotten more, from that particular die? I mean, what did you kind of think of how the Ravens used Lamar in their design running game? And did you, kind of, maybe do you expect anything less or anything more in 2024 as they kind of evolve this offense?
I think the way they handled it was brilliant. I think they started to call more. I can't remember offhand the amount of times and how efficient they were with the different outside zone variations. But I think when you call outside zone's a run scheme where in the coaching world we call it a call it, run it play. You can run it against any fronts, against a loaded box, because what you're doing is you're not blocking that backside defensive end, right? And the defense usually has a safety, so you can still get numbers that way, and you don't have to usually involve the quarterback with a read element to it. So their uptick in usage of outside zone will help with the still being able to run the ball against loaded boxes. But I think situationally they were brilliant with the way they used him. So they would call. It was one of their versions of inside zone read where they would arc. I think it's the backside arc where the backside tight end would arc the defensive end to kind of try to, give him some eye candy. The Ravens converted, they were 12 for 12 converting 3rd and shorts and 4th and shorts with this concept. I think the video going by might have showed 1 or 2 of them already. So they were an astonishing 12 for 12 in short yardage situations with that. And not all of them were Lamar keeping it. It was just even the threat of him keeping it to keep that guy honest. The offensive line can get strong double teams and get a good push for the running back to cram it in to get a couple extra yards. So, having that weapon in short yardage to take away that defensive end, but still able to get vertical movement on inside zone is huge. And obviously, like I said, he didn't have to pull it every time. He doesn't have to run it every time. And then they did have some nice designer. I think it was the Texans playoff game that where they were in a jumbo formation. They faked power one way. The guard pulled. Lamar just kind of paused in the backfield, and then he ran around the other end. I call that power sucker. It's like a naked QB keep, and it was down in the red zone. It was, I think, like a 3 or 4 yard touchdown run, and nobody went with Lamar because they hadn't shown it all year. So there's a lot of creative ways you can use his athleticism too, without him having to take punishing hits.
Last couple questions for you, Bobby. I really appreciate your time. Big picture, what do you think gave the Ravens trouble on offense last year? And obviously, this is an offense that might take a step back. I think we probably will take a step back, at least along the offensive line, but there should be greater comfort there with the receiving core. Derrick Henry is definitely an upgrade on Gus Edwards and Justice Hill and J.K. Dobbins. So what do you think was maybe something that kind of got in their way last year? And what do you think is the kind of defense that maybe gives Lamar trouble, just as a general kind of rule of concept?
I think refining the drop back pass game. I think that's probably the place I would start. And that's, especially with Todd Monken coming in year 1, trying to figure out what Lamar's good at, what they kind of mesh with. Usually year 2, you'll see an uptick with that. So I'm excited to see what direction that goes. And it's not that they were bad with it last year, because Lamar he did a lot of really good things in the drop back game. Obviously he had an MVP season, but I think that can definitely be improved. And I think, obviously I go back to the playoff loss to Kansas City, just the ability to force the Ravens into obvious passing situations, playing man coverage in those situations. I remember Kansas City played a lot of sticky man in that game, but they also the disguised coverage looks against tighter personnel, or against bigger personnel groups was hard on the offense as well. And I think you becoming better in 11 personnel allows you to spread the defense out more. It's harder to disguise. I think there's some advantages to that too. So I think those are a couple of things that they can kind of grow on.
Is there something that you are just really excited for, having looked at everything they did in 23, knowing what they brought in for 2024, knowing, what Lamar can be as a runner, as a passer, as an improviser? What are you, I guess, most excited about what this offense could be in 2024?
That's a good question. I don't know if I've thought of that. I think I'm excited
Derrick Henry, 2 tight end stuff, whatever.
Yes. Yeah. I think I'm excited to see how they double down on the stuff they were good at, like the different counter and inside zone stuff. And then obviously some of those play action concepts we were talking about, like where you got the deep to check down, you got the 1-2 type reads. I think doubling down on the things they were good at will be fun. And then obviously how they try to improve what they weren't good at. Like when I talk about this, I always love to think of the Miami Dolphins, because from 22 to 23 in McDaniel's second year, they doubled and tripled down on what they were good at. And it was hella fun to study. They just, every week defenses knew what they were going to try to do, and they found different ways to get it done. So from like a coaching standpoint, it's like, this is awesome. So I think you can learn a lot from that. But at the same time, they didn't focus enough attention on the areas that they had to improve on, especially later in the season, right? Their run game was too horizontal. They didn't kind of grow the vertical element of it. And then in the drop back pass game, similar to what Baltimore, they kind of struggled in obvious passing situations. I shouldn't say similar to Baltimore, but they struggled more in obvious passing situations. And some of the, whether it be Tua or the design of the offense, needed a little help. So from that standpoint, right? Like, how do they double down on the things they're good at, but also how do they improve the things that they weren't good at? I think that dynamic is interesting, and the balance of the two, right? Because like as a coaching staff, you're like, all right, we need to do what we're good at, right? So like you're going to practice and do what you're good at, but at the same time, the Ravens didn't win the Super Bowl last year, so they have to improve on some of the other areas as well. So just kind of that balance and trying to get both of those things done is always fun to watch.
Awesome. Well, great stuff, Bobby. I learned a lot from talking to you, learned a lot from the book. Again, that is the 2023 Baltimore Ravens Complete Offensive Manual. It's a big one. I think over 250 pages. You can get it on Amazon. Highly recommended if you are a film nerd, if you like, kind of understanding what the Ravens offense is, what it could be. Check it out. Definitely worth your time, definitely worth your money. Thanks so much, Bobby, for joining us, and look forward to maybe reconnecting after the 2024 Offensive Manual comes out next year.
All right, Jonas. Fascinating deep dive into the Ravens offense. Before we get out of here, I do have to bring back the results of our polls on social media at All Banner Sports on Twitter and on Instagram, Balt Banner Sports. Sent out the rosters that we had in our all Ravens roster draft. And boy, the people resoundingly on Twitter sided with my roster. We, of course, had Lamar Jackson as our all-time QB, but they looked up and down the roster and said, this is a team that could go into the 2024 season, maybe win some games. Even though it is half of the Ravens roster, maybe this team could win. I got 65% of the votes on Twitter. You got 34% of the votes. Now, on Instagram, you did very well. 61% of the votes. However, fewer people voted on Instagram, and therefore I came away with a 102 to 82 victory, just like an NBA score. I took home the championship in the all Ravens roster draft. How do you feel?
Paul, I'm not appreciative of what you told me, because you made it seem like I actually came close, when in fact this is like Lamar in the
20 votes
2023 MVP voting. This is like near unanimous. Let's just say that I hope this is the most controversial election that we have this year. Yeah.
All right. That's a heck of a way to go out. Go back and look at our rosters if you'd like on any of our social media platforms. And also, please give us a like, a thumbs up, anywhere that you are watching on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, or listening to us after the fact on any of your favorite podcast platforms. We'd really appreciate if you wrote us a nice little review, and I'll read it out here on the show. We got mere days left before we are going to be at one winning drive to witness the Ravens assemble at training camp. We will have complete coverage on the BaltimoreBanner.com. $1 for 6 months is how you can subscribe. Heck of a deal. And we will have complete podcast coverage as well. Probably coming early in the week next week, maybe Sunday, maybe Monday. We will have a podcast for you very, very soon. For Jonas Shaffer, I'm Paul Mancano. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.